some people might consider a high-risk situation that's unfolding in Lesotho. But let's come to South Africa. The Institute of Risk Management of South Africa has this week released its annual risk report for South Africa. Now, the report is meant to be an input into the risk management process and contribute to better context setting, strategy development and decision making. Well, joining us now is Walter Ehrlich, who's from the Institute of Risk Management South Africa, to tell us a little bit more about the top risks and this year's report's findings. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, Peter. Afternoon to the viewers.
Well, last time we spoke about a big risk, the coronavirus. Yeah. This report looks at a much wider context, and that's South Africa as an entity and all the risks that go into it. Take us through how you compiled this report and what it's meant to tell us.
Right. Thanks. Yeah. So I think it's really important to know that this year's report is the 6th report from the Institute of Risk Management of the country risk report, and it is unique in a way in that it's not like the previous reports. This is not a report that you're going to glance at and know what it's all about and put it down. It's one that you're going to read, you're going to reread it, you're going to think about it and see how it is that you can contribute to some to resolving some of the big risks that we're facing in the country. So just in terms of how it was actually put together, we took 3 well-known scenarios, Clem Santner, Frans Cronje, and the other one whose name I promised I was going to get right, that in Lulamati's South Africa scenarios.
Right.
And we looked at those 3, and then we looked at what the key flags and the key driving forces are in those, and then we also looked back on the risks that we've known over 5 years on the country that never seem to go away, and we said, well, what impact do those risks have, and which of the scenarios do they play into? UMSA then came up with its own scenario with 3 outcomes, and we've then mapped out each of the 12 top risks in the impacts they would have to those outcomes, to the scenarios.
All right, so let's start talking about some of those top risks in no special order, because they're all quite important on their own. But what did you start to see as some of the? Let's start with the recurrent risks, and then we'll go into the ones that are perhaps new.
Yes. So look, there's many risks that we've had on our risk landscape for many years. If I look at just a few of them over here, questions around leadership, ethical leadership, corporate governance failures, deep-rooted corruption, legislative and regulatory uncertainty. Those are pretty new ones, pretty regular ones we've had. Also concerning people, the failure to attract and retain talent, extreme weather, electricity, energy shortages, disruptive technologies, cyber threats. Those have been on for many years, but we don't seem to be winning in many of those. So we've looked at then why. There are some new ones that come on as well. Things like risks around the NHI policy, the National Health Insurance policy, the land reform policy. Those are new ones. So those are the 12. Probably about nine of them are regular ones.
I'm fascinated by the sparseness of unified ethical and visionary leadership. Why does this become a risk?
Yeah. Look, leadership is a people risk in the first place. So we have to have good leaders. And if we look at our country, if we look at some of our state-owned entities, bad leadership got us into this mess, and we're going to need to have good leadership to take us out of it. So to have visionary, ethical leadership is a very powerful thing to get us out, because it also impacts how organizations are governed, how they run. Because there's governance failures occur when leaders fail to lead properly.
All right, and this failure to attract and retain talent, How does that get measured? I mean, how do we get to a point where we realize that this is a challenge for us?
Yeah. So, look, we all know that most of our businesses, we can have machinery, we can have plant and equipment, but it's the people behind and the expertise, the knowledge, the experience of those people, applying their knowledge that makes it work. So, if we take an organization like Eskom, it's a big organization that you really have to know what you're doing over there in order to be a project manager of a big project. And there's a scarcity of skills in the world for those very high-end project managers. Very high-end IT skills are in scarce demand in the world. And it's not as though we don't have the skills in the country. We do have the skills in the country. We just have to place those skills correctly sometimes.
So what does a business manager do with this report? What do they'll get it, they see these things, what do they do then?
Yeah, so really what they should be doing is they should read it through from front to end, not try and absorb every word of it, and then see, well, which are the risks that speak to them, that could have an impact on their objectives, and then perhaps to go deeper into those risks. They're very nicely presented there, 1 page per risk, and they have some facts and figures and some expert insights as well. 1 or 2 experts in that area of risk would then also, and then a business leader can say, well, it might not play out exactly that way for my business, but how might it play out? Or how might this risk play out, not in my business, but in my main supplier who I rely on. So it's really to get you thinking and talking about risk, because risk at the end of the day, all it is, it's an unknown effect, an uncertain effect that can have an impact on your business. And so it's really all about managing uncertainty, trying to understand uncertainty and make good business decisions at the end of that.
Yeah, and I guess as we were saying in the introduction, it's about context setting.
Absolutely.
If you understand the lay of the land, I would imagine that you then start to think, okay, do we buy a lot of capex this year, given what's playing out or not? The danger of ignoring these kinds of risks is what?
Well, look, I mean, at its worst, we could have a failed state. We don't want to have a country that fails. We have some very big risks at the moment. Eskom Energy is a very big risk. The debt that Eskom owes is a very big risk to the country. So those things, some would say they're actually too big to fail, and some would say, well, they have already failed, but we need to get them back on their feet. So at NHI, I mean, it's an enormous opportunity to have good health care accessible to all our citizens. But there are big risks attached to that. And some of us are nervous, maybe, to be very honest, if we say, well, we've had actually so much corruption, how do we know this whole good plan is not going to fall apart because we're not managing the corruption risk properly, or because we're not putting the right leaders in charge. So.
Walter, I wish we could chat a bit more, but again, this report is available on your website, so people can download it and see and go through it, because it seems as if it's important information for all of us.
And it's free, that's the good thing, pre the budget. There's a free ebook version available for download on irmsa.org.za.
Wonderful. Thanks so much indeed, Walter, for joining us.
Thank you.
All right.